Something about him feels off, Camila whispered, reaching for the silent alarm. She thought she was protecting the airport from a stranger in a backpack. She didn't realize she was profiling the head of flight operations during a surprise inspection. By the time the senior director arrived and turned pale, the trap was already sprung. Camila's career was over. If you believe in respect and equality, join us in this fight against racial profiling. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Johnson Brown didn't use the executive entrance that morning. He left his silver Lexus in the back of the long-term parking lot, far from the reserved spot that bore his name, and took the shuttle bus like everyone else. For 20 years, he had seen the airport through the lens of data, flight paths, and security clearances, but the stack of complaints sitting on his desk for the last 3 weeks told a story the numbers couldn't capture. Passengers were reporting a pattern of aggressive questioning and random security checks that seemed to target people who looked just like him. He stepped off the shuttle wearing a faded black t-shirt, jeans that had seen better days, and a beat-up leather backpack. Without his gold-rimmed ID badge clipped to his belt, he felt curiously light, almost invisible. He walked through the automatic sliding doors of the main terminal, the familiar smell of jet fuel and floor wax hitting him. But today, he wasn't the man in charge. He was just another traveler navigating the chaos of a Tuesday morning rush. Johnson stood near the flight information display system, watching the flow of people. Usually, when he walked these halls in his tailored navy suit, staff would nod, straighten their postures, or offer a quick, "Morning, Mr. Brown." Today, a janitor nearly bumped into him with a floor buffer without a word of apology. He didn't mind the anonymity. In fact, he needed it. He was looking for the friction points, the moments where service turned into suspicion. He noticed a group of gate agents huddled near a closed podium, whispering and glancing at a young man in a hoodie sitting nearby. Johnson leaned against a pillar, pretending to check his phone, but his ears were tuned to the environment. He saw the way the security line moved, or rather, how it stalled when certain individuals reached the front. He noted the subtle shifts in body language from the staff, the crossed arms, the lack of eye contact, the clipped tones used with some, and the wide smiles offered to others. His plan was simple. He would check in for a dummy flight to Chicago, go through security, and see exactly how the frontline staff handled a suspicious traveler with no visible status. He knew the operations manual by heart because he had helped write it, but he suspected the version being practiced on the floor was a different book entirely. As he approached the check-in counters, he saw Camila Lockhart. He recognized her name from a commendation letter 6 months ago, though she had never met him in person. She was efficient, moving through the line with a practiced speed until her eyes landed on him. Johnson felt the shift immediately. It wasn't a professional assessment. It was a judgment. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and stepped forward, his heart beating with a mix of professional curiosity and a growing, heavy realization that the complaints on his desk were not an exaggeration. He was no longer the head of flight operations. He was a problem to be managed. Johnson stepped into the queue for the economy check-in, shifting the weight of his backpack. He watched Camila Lockhart from 3 people back. She was smiling at an elderly couple, patiently explaining their gate location, but the moment they moved on and her eyes met Johnson's, the professional warmth vanished. Her expression flattened into something cold and guarded. When it was his turn, Johnson walked up to the counter. He didn't reach for his phone or his ID yet. He wanted to see the baseline level of service offered to a man who looked like him. "Good morning," Johnson said, his voice level and polite. "I saw on the board that the 10:15 to Chicago is showing a 30-minute delay. I was wondering if that's an equipment issue or if we're looking at a rolling delay that might affect connections." Camila didn't look at her screen. She didn't even place her hands on the keyboard. She leaned back slightly, her eyes raking over his black t-shirt and the scuffed edges of his backpack. "The boards are accurate, sir. You'll need to wait for an announcement at the gate like everyone else." "I understand that," Johnson replied, maintaining his calm. "But if it's a mechanical issue, I might need to look at the 11 a.m. flight instead. I have a tight window in Chicago." Camila's jaw tightened. She didn't ask for his name or his flight confirmation. Instead, she lowered her voice, a sharp edge cutting through her tone. "Sir, I told you the information is on the board. You're blocking the line for checked baggage. If you don't have a suitcase to drop off, you need to move along." "I'm asking a standard travel question," Johnson said. He wasn't being difficult. He was using the exact phrasing he'd heard a businessman in a suit use at the adjacent counter just moments before. That man had received a detailed explanation about a late-arriving aircraft from Denver. Camila didn't answer him. Instead, she leaned over to the agent at the next station, Peter Lee. She didn't whisper low enough. Johnson heard the word suspicious clearly. Peter stopped what he was doing and looked over, his eyes narrowing as he took in Johnson's appearance. "Is there a problem here?" Peter asked, stepping away from his own passenger to stand beside Camila. He didn't ask Johnson. He asked her. "He's being uncooperative," Camila said, her voice rising just enough to draw the attention of the passengers in the nearby rows. "He's loitering at the counter and questioning operational details he doesn't need to know." Johnson felt the weight of the collective gaze of the terminal shifting toward him. He saw Peter's hand move toward the radio on his belt. "Sir," Peter said, his voice loud and authoritative, "we've asked you to move. If you continue to disrupt our operations, we're going to have to involve airport security. Step away from the counter right now." Johnson looked at the two of them, the people whose training he had authorized, whose salaries were paid by the efficiency of the wing he managed. He saw the fear they were trying to mask with aggression, a fear born entirely of the image they had constructed of him the moment he walked up. He didn't move. He simply watched them, documenting the failure of the system in real time. The heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots echoed against the terminal floor, a sound Johnson knew well from 1,000 emergency drills, but it felt different when the boots were coming for him. Two airport security officers, their faces set in masks of practiced neutrality, moved through the crowd. They didn't run. They didn't have to. The mere sight of them caused the surrounding passengers to peel away, creating a wide, empty circle around Johnson. "Sir, keep your hands where we can see them," the lead officer commanded. He didn't ask what was happening. He looked at Camila's panicked face, Peter's defensive stance, and Johnson's casual clothes, and he made the same instant calculation everyone else had made. Johnson didn't argue. He slowly raised his hands, palm out, keeping his movements fluid and predictable. He could feel the heat of a dozen smartphone cameras pointed at his back. In the periphery of his vision, he saw people narrating the scene into their devices, capturing what they thought was a standard security intervention. The stakes of his experiment had just bypassed administrative friction and entered the realm of legal and physical risk. If he reached for his ID now, the movement might be misinterpreted as a threat. "I have no intention of causing a disturbance," Johnson said, his voice projecting clearly so the microphones on the phones could pick it up. "I am simply waiting for an answer regarding a flight delay. I haven't raised my voice, and I haven't moved from this spot." "He's being aggressive, officer," Camila interjected, her voice pitching higher. "He refused to move when told the counter was closed to him. He was asking questions about flight equipment and operational windows, things a regular passenger doesn't ask." The officer stepped closer, his hand resting near his belt. "Is that right, sir? Why are you so interested in the mechanics of our flights?" Johnson looked the officer in the eye. He recognized the man. Officer Miller. He had signed off on Miller's commendation for a perimeter breach catch last year. But today, Miller saw a suspicious man in a black t-shirt, not a superior. "I'm interested because I'm a passenger on that flight," Johnson replied. "You're a passenger who's about to be escorted to a holding room for questioning," Peter added, emboldened by the presence of the uniforms. "We don't take chances with people acting erratic at the check-in line." The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. To the crowd and the officers, Johnson was a man on the verge of being detained. To Johnson, this was the final piece of evidence he needed. The system wasn't just broken at the service level. The security apparatus was being used as an enforcement arm for the staff's personal biases. He remained perfectly still, a calm center in a growing storm of accusations, waiting for the one person in this terminal who would look past the shirt and see the man. Officer Miller reached for his handcuffs, the metallic click cutting through the low murmur of the crowd. "Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back. We're moving this to the precinct office." Johnson didn't flinch, but he didn't turn. He stayed exactly where he was, his eyes locked on a man sprinting toward the counter from the direction of the executive offices. It was Marcus Vaughn, the airport's senior director of terminal services. Marcus was out of breath, his tie slightly askew, clutching a tablet in one hand. "Stop! Miller, stand down right now!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with the strain. The security officers froze. Camila and Peter looked up, confused by the sudden intervention of a high-ranking director. Camila actually stepped forward, thinking Marcus was there to assist them. "Director Vaughn, thank God. This man is being completely uncooperative and—" "Be quiet, Camila," Marcus snapped, not even looking at her. He pushed past the security officers, nearly tripping in his haste to reach Johnson. He stopped inches away, his face pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Mr. Brown! Johnson! I am so sorry. I just saw the alert on the manifest. I had no idea you were coming in on the floor today." The silence that followed was absolute. The smartphone cameras didn't stop recording, but the people holding them lowered their arms in collective confusion. Officer Miller's hand dropped from his belt. "Director, you know this man?" Marcus turned to the officers, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and sheer panic. "Know him? This is Johnson Brown. He is the head of flight operations. He's the man who signs the budget for your department, Miller. He's the man responsible for every plane that touches the tarmac at this airport." Camila's hand, which had been resting confidently on the counter, began to shake. She looked at Johnson, really looked at him, and the realization of what she had done began to sink in. The suspicious man in the black t-shirt was the highest-ranking operational official in the building. Peter Lee looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. He tried to speak, to offer some kind of immediate apology, but the words died in his throat. Johnson slowly lowered his hands. He didn't look at Marcus, and he didn't look at the guards. He kept his gaze fixed on Camila. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had inverted entirely. The air of smug authority that had governed the check-in counter for the last 10 minutes evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical atmosphere of corporate accountability. "Marcus," Johnson said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed terminal, "I believe we have a significant breakdown in our standard operating procedures. Why don't you clear a path? I think the staff and I have some things to discuss that aren't on the board." Johnson didn't raise his voice, and he didn't ask the security officers to leave. He wanted them to hear this as much as the agents. He stepped closer to the counter, not with the aggression Camila had accused him of, but with the steady, undeniable weight of a man who owned the air they were breathing. Camila was staring at her keyboard, her hands flat against the laminate surface, as if trying to steady the world around her. "Look at me, Camila," Johnson said. It wasn't a shout, it was a directive. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were rimmed with red. The hardened gaze from 10 minutes ago had collapsed into a look of pure, panicked survival. Johnson didn't find any joy in it. "I came here today without a badge because I wanted to see what our passengers see," Johnson began, his voice carrying through the silent terminal. "I've spent 20 years in operations making sure planes land on time, making sure the fuel is efficient, and making sure the schedules are perfect. But none of that matters if the person at the front door decides someone doesn't belong here based on the color of their shirt or the color of their skin." He turned his gaze to Peter, who was standing stiffly, his face ashen. "You called me suspicious because I asked about a delay. You didn't check my ticket. You didn't check the manifest. You didn't even check the computer in front of you. You made a mental calculation based on a bias that has no place in this industry." A few passengers in the background began to clap softly, but Johnson held up a hand to quiet them. This wasn't a performance for the crowd. It was a systemic autopsy. "What I found today wasn't a security threat," Johnson continued, looking back at Camila. "What I found was fear instead of service. I found judgment instead of respect. You used your position, and you used these officers to intimidate a man who was doing nothing more than asking for the service he paid for. If I were a businessman in a suit asking that same question, you would have given me a flight number and a smile. We both know that's true." Camila tried to swallow, her voice coming out as a dry whisper. "Mr. Brown, I thought I was following protocol. I thought—" "Protocol is a series of steps designed to ensure safety and efficiency," Johnson interrupted calmly. "Nowhere in the manual I wrote does it say, profile the passenger and escalate to security if they ask for information. You didn't follow protocol, Camila. You followed a feeling. And that feeling just cost this airport its integrity for everyone watching on those phones." He looked at Marcus, the director, who was still standing by, looking ready to fire everyone on the spot. "Marcus, take their badges. They are removed from duty effective immediately pending a full investigation into every interaction they've logged over the last 90 days. I want to know if this was a one-time feeling or if this is how they've been representing my office to the public every single day. Johnson picked up his backpack and slung it over one shoulder. He looked at the security officers, who looked humbled, their handcuffs tucked back into their pouches. "The lesson today is simple," Johnson said, his final words hitting the air with the finality of a closing cockpit door. "You never know who is standing in front of you. But more importantly, it shouldn't matter who is standing in front of you. Every person who walks through those sliding doors deserves the same level of respect. Today, you failed that test. Tomorrow, the training for this entire terminal changes." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked toward the exit, his pace steady, leaving a stunned silence in his wake that was louder than any flight engine. Johnson Brown didn't need to shout to be heard. He let the systems he built do the talking. By stepping out of the shadows and onto the terminal floor, he proved that true leadership isn't found in a title or a tailored suit. It's found in the courage to see the world through the eyes of those you serve. His undercover journey transformed a moment of blatant prejudice into a blueprint for dignity, ensuring that at his airport, a person's character is the only thing that matters. If you believe that respect should be the standard for every traveler, regardless of who they are or what they wear, then this story is for you. We believe in the power of truth and the impact of accountability. Don't miss our next deep dive into stories of justice and instant karma. Hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Join our community today and help us spread stories that demand a higher standard. Your support helps us keep the truth flying high.